From the beginning of this century on, classical ballet found a rival in North European expressionist dance. It was Rudolf von Laban who laid the foundations for this new form. He was born in 1879 in Bratislava, at the heart of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. The Habsburg Empire was a mosaic of diverse cultures, races, and traditions. Laban was the son of a military officer and able to travel across the empire. From very early on, he was fascinated by the diversity of dances and the variety of the body's movements and expressions he saw. His father wanted him to enter the army, but Laban preferred the bohemian life to military maneuvers and painting to the art of war. He studied fine art in Munich and in Paris. In 1907, he returned to Vienna. The empire was on the verge of an extraordinary apocalypse. Nietzsche had proclaimed, "God is dead." This led to wholesale reevaluation of the established order. In Vienna, Wittgenstein outlined his first theories, encouraged by Krauss. They both brought the limits of language into question. In Vienna, Freud denounced the powers of reason to explore the depths of the psyche. In Vienna, the writers Schnitzler, Hugo von Hofmannsthal, and Zweig, and the painters Kokoschka, Klimt, and Schiele revealed the fragility of the individual and his disintegration. Again in Vienna, the composer Schönberg revolutionized traditional harmony by liberating music from the formal structures of tonality. The pace of industrialization accelerated. There was a violent reaction against the threat from society and the machine. This was manifested in a return to nature, to a free and healthy body. In this atmosphere, the Americans, Isadora Duncan and Ruth St. Denis, met with great success. They wanted to free the body from any constraint. Their best-known disciple was Greta Wiesenthal. In this environment, Laban would lay the foundations for a new dance. First of all, he located its essential components: space, time, and weight. Dance had evolved in a flat space, limited by the audience it was forced to face. Laban cut through this and gave back to space its depth. He conceived of movement through space in a volume whose form would be the icosahedron, that is to say, a volume of multiple directions. Space became a mobile partner to the dancer, moving at the same time. He then addressed the pace and time of movement, quick or slow, brief or sustained. No longer limited by music, the meter of a poem or silence alone sufficed. Movement was freed from time. Finally, he addressed weight. While the classical dancer tried to escape the downward pull of gravity through balance and lift, Laban made use of weight. It was he who determined the dynamics of movement and the continual swing between balance and imbalance. He realized that for every muscular contraction there was a relaxation. Laban liberated movement from all formal constraints. He emancipated it from music, drama, and from any conventional notion of steps. His search through movement for a total harmony of soul and spirit had parallels with the ideas of der Blaue Reiter, the Blue Rider, a group of painters who had settled in Munich in 1913 around Wassily Kandinsky and Franz Marc. Kandinsky said, "Every work of art proceeds from an inner necessity," and also said, "Art has to render visible the invisible." After the summer of 1913, Laban gave classes and lectures in Switzerland at the edge of Lake Maggiore in Monte Verita. It was a center for the intelligentsia. There, Rainer Maria Rilke, James Joyce, and Hugo Boll were to be found alongside the Russian anarchists. All basked in a society in harmony with nature and in the climate of reform. There, Laban found the perfect conditions to experiment with his ideas. In the middle of one beautiful hot summer, Mary Wiegmann arrived. She had come from another utopian community, Hellerau, where her teacher was Jacques Dalcroze. His eurythmics were the rage throughout Europe, providing Nijinsky with the inspiration for the Rite of Spring. But the Dalcroze method, which subordinated movement to music, no longer held an interest for Mary Wiegmann, and the solos she choreographed without any music had left Dalcroze unmoved. At Hellerau, she had met some painters from Dresden who used the dancers as their models. Influenced by Fauvism, by black art, and by Edward Munch, they dreamed of uniting art and life in an explosion of color. There were 4 of them. Their group was called Die Brücke, the bridge, and they marked a new departure for Expressionism into the plastic arts. Emil Nolde, who was closely associated with the group, was a friend of Wiegmann. On his advice, she went to meet Laban. Like her, Laban found his inspiration from movement itself and not from music. Wiegmann became his pupil and then his assistant. Laban needed a dancer to challenge him. This Mary Wiegmann did, and they began a period of intense experiment. Wiegmann presented her first solos in which she used the concept of Labanian space. She said, "Laban created for dance what is represented by harmony in music. He used the laws governing space as a point of departure, a basis for the creation of dances." Laban and Wiegmann were at Monte Verita until the end of the summer. When war broke out, they moved their school to Zurich, where it shared quarters with the Dadaists, whose refusal to join the war sharpened their wit and their scorn. Dada was concerned with creative writing, which also interested Laban and Wiegmann. Wiegmann created a strange echo of the Dadaists' own research. For her, it was a question of inventing a discourse where the communicative strength lay not in a grammar, but rather in a rhythmic pulse. The artists met at the Café des Banques, the precursor to the Cabaret Voltaire, where Mary Wiegmann often performed. Meanwhile, the rest of Europe was being torn apart. The war left behind it a world in ruins, millions of young men dead, and an entire generation destroyed. The painters from the group Die Brücke and others, Max Beckmann and Otto Dix among them, remained scarred forever and gave German expressionism a new direction, more harsh and aggressive and full of despair, notably in Dix's trilogy filled with mutilated soldiers exposing the ruin of the world. The trenches had slashed a gaping wound across the face of Europe, a psychological injury which would leave scars for decades. Dadaism was formed in 1916, the year of the Battle of Verdun. Their provocative cult of nothing blew a radical wind of protest through the literary and artistic circles of Europe. All the misery of a broken Europe was encapsulated in Picabia's tirade. Honor is bought and sold like a bit of os. Dada feels nothing. It is nothing. Nothing, nothing. Like your hopes, it is nothing. Like your paradise, it is nothing. Like your idols, it is nothing. Like your politicians, nothing. Laban returned to Germany. He was appointed director of the National Ballet. It was his first official position. After 1921, he settled in Hamburg. He was a director of a school and a company named Tanzbühne Laban. It was in this company that Kurt Jooss was first seen. Kurt Jooss was not yet a dancer. Laban had nonetheless enrolled him in his company. His personality carried more weight than his technique. Jooss quickly became Laban's collaborator as Wiegmann had been 8 years previously. He filled out Laban's theories. Working within the Laban scales, he concentrated on movement expression. Unusually, he choreographed a male duo. He was appointed choreographer of a public theater where he met future colleagues, the composer Fritz Cohen and the designer Hein Heckroth. He made Laban's theories known in professional circles and for the first time introduced the term Tanztheater, dance theater. In 1927, with Sigurd Leder, he created a dance department in the Essen Academy, the Volkswangschule. His lessons integrated elements from classical ballet. At the same time, he founded his own company. In 1928, he organized the Congress of German Dancers. He believed that modern dance should incorporate elements from its heritage, including those of the classical, whereas Mary Wiegmann believed that expressionist dance and classical dance were incompatible. Wiegmann had settled in Dresden and formed a school and company of her own. She continued to make use of space as Laban had taught her to, adding to that concept the mystique of her instinct and a more dramatic use of gesture. The same German romanticism was found in Wiegmann's choreography as in the theatrical productions of Max Reinhardt and in the cinema of Murnau, Fritz Lang, and Pabst. The the same contrasts in the use of light, the same dramatic use of gesture, the same allure of the irrational. After the defeat of the Spartakists, who had sown seeds of hope in the wake of the Russian Revolution, Germany's big cities made it a center of modernity. In the future, Berlin would become a metropolis attracting both intellectuals and artists, among them Francis Bacon. Each day, new theaters, new cabarets would spring up. People were moved by Anita Berber, the nocturnal goddess of an elegant despair, and were amused by Valeska Gert, who brought her political satire onto the contemporary stage. Berlin's amazing dynamism at that time was portrayed in Alexander Doblin's novel Berlin Alexanderplatz and in Steinberg's film The Blue Angel. The frenzied pace of the beginning of the century and its excessive interest in the psyche were now replaced by a desire for clarity. Germany was to be rebuilt. This would be completed using the new principles of architecture from the school of the Bauhaus. For their first director, Walter Gropius, architecture was a question of making domestic an industrialized society, which he integrated into everyday life. For the members of the Bauhaus, the excesses of mechanization became creative material. Out of this alliance between man and the machine, industrial art was born. Klee, Kandinsky, and Mahaly-Nagy all taught at the Bauhaus, and also the painter Oskar Schlemmer, the founder of an amazing ballet company. Inspired by the impersonality of the puppet, he combined geometric form with abstract movement in the triadic ballet. Wiegmann was aware of this trend. Her choreography was characterized by stark, simple line and stylized gesture. In 1929, she entered into a new phase with a huge choral fresco, Totenmahl. Imposing masses of figures were moved across the stage to create a total and convulsive performance. It was an almost religious vision of theater, through which a German aspiration towards a form greater than the community began to break through. In the beginning of the 30s, modern dance held a more important position than classical ballet in Germany. This was unique in Europe. For the first time, an experimental dance form was accepted into the official circuit of public theaters and opera houses. Laban held the pole position. His pupils formed schools in Venice, Budapest, Rome, and Anvers. The ballets Jos were a triumph on Broadway, and the school in Essen became international. Wiegmann was head of 2 schools in Germany, and one of her pupils formed another in America. Dancers trained by Wiegmann took German dance throughout the world. Yvonne Georgi, Gret Paluka, and Harold Kreutzberg, who would link the power of the expressionist with the control of the classical. Seen from abroad, German dance seemed to ride the crest of a tidal wave. However, it was now forced to confront internal economic and political difficulties which were to prove fatal. The economic crisis had brought great suffering to Germany. Throughout all classes of society, there was a hatred of the power of money and international capitalism, mixed with anti-Semitism. With the help of a forceful propaganda campaign full of lies, the National Socialist Party, led by Adolf Hitler, was ready to take power. In the world of dance, Kurt Jooss would be the first to suffer the consequences of this. Neither Laban nor Wiegmann had paid much attention to social issues in their works. In contrast, the choreography of Kurt Jooss was an echo of reality and highlighted a critique of the social order. In 1932, he had already raised the issue of social difference in his ballet, Big City, where the workers danced an old-fashioned waltz, while the bourgeoisie chose a fashionable Charleston. There was a method of moving appropriate to each social class. However, the green table above all others enabled Jooss to articulate his criticism of society through satire. This work would make him famous. The green table plays out the implacable process of linking the chain between the worlds of money and war. The grotesque figures of the diplomats sit around the table, a game of roulette on which the destiny of mankind is played out. The despair of the mother, the young girl's innocence put up for sale, the idealism of the young man destroyed, the spectacle of war which makes each man's destiny ugly and vile. Jos's ballet reworked the medieval traditions of grotesque dance. In this work, the figure of Death bore the colors of war. Death decided each man's fate. Concerning the green table, Laban wrote to Jos, "I see a great hope emerging in your work. You have found a language whose movement is able to express in a simple way secular and fundamental concepts which can only be expressed through dance." The piece was premiered in Paris. It was hardly performed in Germany because the political climate around Jos deteriorated increasingly quickly. Adolf Hitler came to power in January 1933. In February, he used the burning of the Reichstag as a pretext to eliminate the communist opposition. In March, he took hold of all reins of power. In May, the rights of assembly and freedom of expression were curtailed. The Bauhaus school closed. The first laws on racial segregation systematically cast the Jews out of all social and intellectual life. It marked the beginning of the pogroms, the raids on the Jewish ghettos. Germany was brought to heel under National Socialism. The music for the Green Table was composed by Fritz Cohen. The Nazis demanded that Jos part from his composer and all of his Jewish colleagues. He refused, and from now on was openly anti-fascist and pacifist. Violence had sent his Jewish colleagues away, so Jos took advantage of a tour abroad to emigrate with his company. Many intellectuals and artists emigrated at the same time: Fritz Lang, Max Reinhardt, Bruno Walter. After traveling for a short while, Jos and his family were welcomed at Dartington Hall in England. Dartington was a medieval manor. A couple of utopian millionaires had transformed it into a progressive center for agriculture, education, and artistic creativity. It did not take Jos and later long to re-establish a school, a Volkswangschule in Utopia. The reputation of their ballet was enormous, and this school quickly took on an international dimension. At Dartington, in these ideal conditions, Jos created several new works: Spring Tale, Chronica, and Ballade. Meanwhile, Laban and Wiegmann stayed in Germany. Since 1930, Laban had been the ballet master at the Berlin Opera. He was still an official artist. When Jos chose exile, Laban was choreographing Tannhäuser, directed by Toscanini, for the Bayreuth Festival. In 1934, he was appointed director of the Deutsche Tanzbühne, but the bodies which had become alive through his free dance were transformed under Nazism. They became the submissive bodies of gymnasts. In 1936, the opening of the Olympic Games was held in Berlin.
Ich verkünde die Spiele von Berlin zur Feier der 11. Olympiaden Steuerzeitrechnung als eröffnet.
Laban presided over the International Festival of Dance. The choral dances he had composed for the occasion were carried out by dancers from all over Germany. All were trained in kinetography, which was a way of writing choreography devised by Laban.